Good afternoon and welcome to this final in our Advent Studies series. We're really pleased that so many of you are able to tune in from all over the place, all over the diocese and even from beyond this diocese. I'm glad that you are finding this to be a series that gives you some real food for thought. And today we are up to the final mark of mission, the one which deals with systemic or structural injustice. So let's look quickly at the 5 marks of mission that are summarised as tell and teach, which we did in week 1, tend, which was week 2, treasure last week, and this week, transform.
And the first 4 of those marks are really about acting locally and personally, but this one, transform, is about looking at the way societies work. Often this is last on the list, but we've put it 4th on the list rather than 5th, but we've put it last because these structures underpin all the other 4.
So we've tweaked the order that you'll find if you go on websites about the 5 marks of mission. You'll find this one in the 4th place.
Yep.
But we're putting it here at the end because of, as Ian said, that real importance in the way in which it underpins everything else. And it's summarised as transform, as I said. And the mark reads, to seek to transform unjust structures of society, to challenge violence of every kind, and pursue peace and reconciliation. This is a really interesting mark of mission because when we start to look at Jesus' ministry, we see that he didn't actually go around trying to reform the structures. He didn't become a scribe or a Pharisee. He didn't seek political power. He didn't set up alternative structure. He taught the crowds and he gathered a group of disciples around him, but he didn't set up a hierarchy of power among them. It was kind of a very flat structure in institutional terms. But he did critique the structures. And if you look at Matthew 23, verse 23, he said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill and cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and peace." So while that wasn't a critique of the structures, it was a critique of the people working within the structures and about their hypocrisy.
Yeah, and he really did not miss them on the way through. He called them terrible things like whited sepulchres, graves that look pretty on the outside, but inside are full of filth and all kinds of rottenness. And you do wonder whether he wasn't perhaps describing the systems as well as individuals like Pharisees, but the Pharisaical system. And you can apply the same thing to some political parties, to some regimes. You choose the political party.
Or the
regime. And he said, he seems to be terribly angry when he says, "You're whited sepulchres, you're horrible, you're full of filth.
Broods of vipers."
But I think he partly said that as a corrective, as a teaching thing. You know, in other words, say, look at yourselves, look what you do. He could have said that to Mr. Putin, perhaps.
These
days.
There is a thing there too where an institution can shelter people who don't really want to put the energy into living well themselves, living the lives that God calls us to live.
Yeah, the sociopaths.
Who find a place in an institution that keeps them comfortable. And the institutions just tend to do that. It goes with the territory, really.
Yeah, but there's a real invitation to look deeply into motivations and the things that drive various organisations.
Because structures are very important to be able to achieve things, but if they become places that are sheltering people who just want to have a comfortable life, then they're not doing what they're meant to do. And that's, I think, what was happening with the scribes and the Pharisees. They liked being scribes and Pharisees, but they weren't perhaps really listening to what God was calling them to be.
So he went on to say how we could live well, and one of the classics is the Sermon on the Mount. And these are really transformative individual lines that turn everything upside down, all social expectations, political expectations, on their head. So the first one...
Yes, these are the Beatitudes. Some of them, you'll know them as the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
And blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely and on my account. So that's just, one of the places in which Jesus seems to turn everything on its head, all our expectations about the way in which society works, about the things that people will get from society, about how we should be living in relation to each other. There are a whole lot more, and we have grouped them into Jesus' teachings, some economic teachings and also some social political teachings. It's really just a way of understanding the two different types of teachings, but it's very hard to categorise these things. Jesus' teachings are so radical and so different that it's very hard to put a system on them like that.
You can imagine the people saying, what do you mean the blessed are the meek?
Yes.
They say, what? And then some people would have said, did he say blessed are the cheesemakers?
You can see where Monty Python got it from. Yes. So you're going to talk a bit about the economic teachings, won't you?
Well, yeah. Well, it's completely the opposite to the way most economies work. Jesus is saying, give stuff away, give it all to the poor, arrange your life so that there can be a communal approach to things. And in Palestine in his day, and most Western economies these days, that's not what happens. Blessed are the people who accumulate a lot of money. Blessed are the people who manipulate the systems to draw funds into their own purview. And Jesus is absolutely against this stuff. You could say he's one of the first radical economists heading in the direction of a type of communal socialism even.
So there's a radical generosity there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
And, you see it in things like the bit from Luke 6:35, but love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return.
Once again, you can see the crowd say, what do you mean? Love your enemies and lend, expecting nothing in return? You must be joking.
Yeah.
But imagine if those teachings absolutely infiltrated economic and political systems. Just imagine how everything would be different and so much better.
And in one of the other studies too, we talked about the rich ruler who came to Jesus. And you get it in Luke chapter 18 and in Matthew chapter 19, slightly different versions, but basically saying the same thing, isn't it? Which is this thought that to inherit eternal life, actually this rich man had to give everything away and follow Jesus.
Yeah. And it's not just the giving away that liberates the person, it's the giving it to the poor that liberates the poor as well. So it's brilliant. But it's a great economist.
Yes, well, this is from a man who did study economics.
Yeah, not well.
Not well. A long time ago. But there's this, to me, there's a sense here that I find personally quite difficult, which is that Jesus is telling us that we should avoid becoming attached to things, and we should be prepared not to be so fixated on our own financial well-being for the sake of others. Like I think, well, look, I can look after myself and then I'm better positioned to look after other people as well. But he's asking more of us than that, I believe, in fact. And it seems to be a very long way from the prosperity doctrine that you can see in churches, which has, well, you can see in the world, but also it infects churches, that if you're doing well financially, God must be pleased with you and be rewarding you. Like, it's one thing to see what you have as a gift from God, as blessing from God, but to see it as being kind of a tick for the way you're living is another step altogether. And the converse of it is, if things are going wrong in your life, it must be that God is not pleased with you. And that's clearly not the case. That's clearly wrong.
Yeah, it's lousy theology.
It's lousy theology. It's a long way, though. Jesus' way of inviting us to live is a long way from the way in which his society was organised, and as you've said, the way our society is organised as well. I often used to say that the good news is that God loves you, the bad news is that God doesn't care about money.
Yeah. And then you get this incredibly provocative statement from Jesus: if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not even withhold your shirt. Now, this is a potentially radical sociological transformation. If you really think about it and apply it, it just would filter through the whole of society, so that, you know, people would completely change. It would be wonderful. And it does suggest a radical generosity. It's a command from Jesus that we are to avoid becoming attached to things, and that we be prepared to sacrifice our own financial well-being.
I have to say that this is a part of Jesus' teaching I'm still working on.
Well, we all are. We're turning the other cheek. Not easy. But the more that people do it, the better. And there is a lot of turning the other cheek in our lives, isn't there? When you think about it, the number of times we have actually turned the other cheek in perhaps a family or a group or a bunch of friends, and it's made all the difference.
Put up with behaviour that makes you quite angry.
Yeah, and if you multiply...
Found a way round.
You multiply those things that we have done, the turning of the other cheeks, right through society, wow. Wow.
So there's that great statement in Matthew 2, I think, which summarises what Jesus is telling us about this, saying, it's in Matthew 6, verse 24, no one can serve two masters. And there's a word in the next bit which can be translated either as slave or servant. I'm choosing to use servant. No one can serve two masters, for a servant will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth.
The very early followers of Jesus sort of got the message. They did actually understand that Jesus was on about some radical redistribution of wealth and power and influence. And so we have an example in Acts of the early church adopting a communal approach, almost a communistic approach to the ownership of goods. And it reads, now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. Now, the writer of Acts was trying to make a point that they really did believe in some radical transformation of economic ownership.
And if you look at many of the religious orders across the centuries, they have a similar approach, that the individual members of the order go in and own nothing. That perhaps they own the clothes that they are wearing or something like that. But basically, it is a different way of managing the finances of the group rather than the finances of the individual.
Now, we can't go the whole hog. It's impossible for us
In our society.
Being so imbued with Western society's attitudes and values, and it's almost impossible for societies as a whole to do it. But it's a step in the right direction to do it a bit, and we do. I mean, our nation, our economic system, does apply, those sort of principles to the poor and the marginalised, the left out. And we do have the redistribution of wealth through taxes, but we might go a little further.
There are many ways in which Christian teaching has imbued our society, and that's there, that sense of looking after people who are in need of it. Well, that's the kind of economic side, but if you look at Jesus' teaching, social and political teaching, you get a sense too of a radical inclusion and humility, again, which were not the way of the society of his day, even less than they are in our own society. In Matthew 20, there's the section where the disciples are jostling for position. And Jesus calls to them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first amongst you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man came not to serve, but to serve, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Complete. We're so used to those words, aren't they? We are so used to them. We've been hearing them so many years. I think we lose the sense of just what an overturning it was, how paradoxical it seemed at the time, that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve.
Yeah, whoever wishes to be great among you must be the servant. You can imagine in a ridiculous situation where everybody's trying to be everybody else's servant so that they could be greater.
Yes.
But what Jesus was really on about is you don't want to be the greatest.
Yes.
It's not about you. It's about us.
And you can see it in that wonderful byplay between Jesus and Peter when Jesus goes to wash his disciples' feet, and Peter says, no, you can't wash my feet, and Jesus chastises him, said, yes, I will wash. Oh, well, wash all of me then. Yeah. So Peter kind of yet again seems to kind of miss the point and to want to, to want to make himself somehow the centre of it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, but such a human thing too.
One of the most amazing bits of inclusion that Jesus did was to reach out to not only reach out to lepers, but to touch them. And they were completely untouchable in his day. But he was so keen on including them that he actually touched them. Mm. And he had a whole lot of really important women as followers. In fact, there's a lot to argue that without the women's ministry, he wouldn't have got up, so to speak, because the women's ministry was absolutely essential, not only in providing a few funds, but in supporting him and being able to speak out to other women. And children who didn't get a look in...
weren't counted, like women weren't counted in official numbers.
Jesus was so inclusive that he said, if you want to be in the realm of the divine, be like a kid. And the people, once again, would have said, what? Yes.
So you get the outcasts, women and children, all clearly included. And in the website resources, we've put in a few biblical references just to back up our assertions, but I'm sure you know them anyway. But that was that sense of no one was beyond the pale for Jesus. Nobody that the normal society thought was lesser in any way was held in that regard by Jesus, that he saw the humanity of each and every person, whatever their situation in life. So it was an example of radical love. So when we're trying to fulfill the two great commandments in our own lives, loving God and loving our neighbours as ourselves, this is the example that we look towards, the way Jesus loved. This man who said in Luke chapter 6, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. It's an extraordinary statement, isn't it?
I'm not very good at doing this at times, and I'm like a lot of old men. I rave at the television at our various political rulers. At the various political rulers, and every now and then, not often enough, I pull myself up and say, I'll pray for this bloke. I won't yell at him. I won't rave on about how terrible he is, but I'll pray for him. And every now and then I go further and I try to love him. This is, you've got your people on the television that you rave about too. It's a really good exercise just to look at them and say, look, they're just human beings. God loves them. I could try and pray for them. It doesn't happen that often, unfortunately.
In the time that I was here as diocesan bishop, I was trolled on the internet quite badly at times. Being a woman and a bishop seems to bring out the worst in some people. And I would walk around the house. Most of the time I didn't look. I didn't engage with it. Sometimes I had to. But I would walk around the house saying those wonderful lines from one of Paul's letters. It's in one of our blessings. Render to no one evil for evil. Render to no one evil for evil. So don't dish back what's being dished up to you, because that is such a natural human thing. And if I had got caught up in that, it would have been no good for anybody. Absolutely no good for anybody. But to take the step into praying and loving and saying, there's nothing I can do about this except offer it to God, offer my own reaction to God, and offer these people to God. I'm not sure it was such a wonderful, generous thing for me to do, because it made me feel better. So it was a quid pro quo for me in it, absolutely. But it is a stepping aside from our normal human reaction of self-defence and attack.
And underlying all this radical transformation is or at least one fundamental idea, that it's not about you. It's not about you, it's about us. And it's about the God in us. And so much of the stuff that we do is about me. It's about me rather than about us. And
when you say us, do you mean the community?
Community, whatever.
The whole
group. It's not about you. It's about, and so much of teaching and advertising and the system it's about you. You can do this, you can do that, you can buy this, you can have this, you. And so the advertising becomes me, I. And Jesus is about us. And if systems and individuals grasp that more solidly, transformation happens.
So this is, if we're looking at transforming institutions, this is about questioning our institutions and the extent to which our institutions are enabling people to live in this way and enabling people to share justly the resources of the earth, to use one of the lines from classic prayer, enabling people to do things. Rather, the institutions exist for us. They don't exist for themselves. The institutions exist for the people who are the members of the institution, and the church also exists for people who are beyond the institution of the church. This is what our mission is, isn't it? This implies questioning our institutions about economic and social justice. It's about reforming them to ensure greater justice.
Yep.
Yeah. So this, I reckon, in lots of ways, this feels really unmanageable, doesn't it? Like here we are sitting here in Grafton. It's a big ask. Like institutions have rolled on for millennia in some cases. And I think we often do feel powerless, that we feel that we can operate within our own families and things like that, but we can't operate up against an institution like an education system or a political system or the church. But systemic change can be affected, and we've all seen examples of it. We can see the part that the church across the world played in opposing apartheid in South Africa, for instance. And historically, the anti-slavery movement had deep roots in the churches. And even today, the trafficking of people continues, and churches are working to oppose this modern slavery. I think it's been one of the projects of the current Archbishop of Canterbury, is to draw attention to all the ways in which slavery is actually still occurring in our world. Some of you may remember, those of you who've been synod members particularly, may remember that some years ago we looked at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. This for me is a real sign of hope, the Sustainable Development Goals. Way back before the turn of the century, the United Nations had some Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, which were focused on things like child mortality and poverty and malaria, HIV, AIDS. And they ran from 1990 through to about 2010. There was a report done in 2015 about the outcomes. So these were goals around which the member nations of the United Nations, which is pretty well every nation on earth, focused their attention. And I think much to everyone's surprise, really, if you look at the metrics, there have been significant reductions over the years of people focusing on these goals in things like child mortality across the world. There have been increases in the number of children who are in school across the world. There has been a reduction in extreme poverty. There have been improvements in the care of people with HIV, AIDS, and a reduction in new infections. Malaria has been significantly, I was going to say hit on the head. I don't know if that's the right
that will do.
the right phrase, but malaria has prevention has stormed ahead over these periods. And after the success of the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, the UN then adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were more focused on not just on developing countries, but actually around the world. And they focus on systemic change to bring about a more equitable sharing of resources and greater justice. And so some of the things that they deal with are poverty, again, access to education, access to water and sanitation, economic growth, sustainable consumption and production, and that's an area where many developed countries really need to put in more effort, climate change, reduction of inequality. So these 17 goals are running at the moment and inspiring many of the development organisations around the world and many governments, including our own, to focus their efforts more carefully in those areas rather than having a scattergun approach in these matters. So the Anglican Board of Mission, a couple of years ago, put together an excellent Bible study on the Sustainable Development Goals. It was put together by Julianne Stewart, and I really commend it to you. It's good just to read, and you can get it online. We've put the link in the website resources. But the Sustainable Development Goals, following on from the success of the Millennium Development Goals, really give me hope about the possibilities for systemic change in some of these very difficult areas that you would think really are intractable. I don't think they are, actually. I think moves are being made.
Oh, it's all very complicated, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, it's heavy stuff.
But there are real signs of hope, aren't there? There's real progress, and individuals make real progress in trying to sort themselves out in terms of Jesus' teaching. We've all done that from time to time, haven't we? Some of us, like me, might have regressed from time to time. Yes. But we try, and that's what really matters, that we do try. And we honour the one who loves us and the one we love and the one we listen to. Oh, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say something about the transforming of structures. Like, that was all very international, that stuff.
Yep.
And there's quite a lot of stuff on websites and things like that about systemic change internationally. But what happens when we're looking nationally and locally? And that's where I think we want to encourage you to have some discussions, in those of you who are meeting in groups.
Yeah, and some of the areas you could talk about include multiculturalism, reconciliation with Indigenous cultures, gender issues, sexual orientation issues, and anti-poverty programs. They're things that you might fruitfully look at. They're things you might argue over.
Yeah, well, indeed. You know,
right.
Sit down with a glass of wine or whatever. So really, it's a question of running this lens, isn't it, of radical human equality, Jesus' view of us rather than our view of each other, running this lens of human equality in the sight of God over our society. What do we need to think more deeply about? What do we need to change? How can we make sure people have equal access to the means to flourish? Those are the kinds of questions I think that Jesus would be wanting us to focus on.
And then there's the stuff that Jesus would want us to focus on in our own personal lives. What happens in families and families of origin is just so powerful. How children are raised, how the twig is bent, makes all the difference. And justice and turning the other cheek and incorporating difference within a household, within a family, and non-violence, and an understanding about who gets what and how the consumption happens, and whether the children have rights or not, or how much they have, really is really significant in our lives and really worth investigating. It's really hard to do this, but every now and then it's good for families to say what they're unhappy about in their relationships. Hornet's nest, I know. But if you're game...
You didn't tell me you were going to say that.
No.
He's lobbed that one in.
Yeah, if you're game, that's how you can have a discussion, but don't let anybody else watch. Yes. And don't video it.
We have an 11-year-old granddaughter. I'd be interested in her response to that question.
Yeah.
But it is how we live in families determines people's expectation, what they grow up with. Some years ago, when we were living in Adelaide, Archbishop Deng from the South Sudan came to Adelaide on a visit, and he came and talked in the cathedral. He actually preached and also talked in the cathedral in Adelaide. And one of his comments has sat with me over all these years. He said that in South Sudan, we have generations who have forgotten how to live in peace. Their only experience of life is of war, and they simply do not know how to live together in peace in a society. And I was completely gobsmacked by that statement. I thought, how can you not know? Well, of course you don't. If your experience is of fear, of being chased from your villages, of waiting to be slaughtered, or of members of your family being slaughtered or going off to slaughter someone else, how do you learn how to resolve conflict in any other way than at the end of a gun? How do you know how to sit down and have conversations with people? How do you know how to live in a way that builds trust in communities? So it's how we live in a community and in a society is enormously powerful in helping people understand how to relate and what works. And when we get it wrong, we set up situations where people actually are not equipped to live the way that we believe God is calling us to live.
Oh, well, we've almost reached the end. There's so many things to think about, so many ways that we can, well, help live the dream that Jesus has got for us. That's our mission, you know. Jesus desperately wants people to be happy and fulfilled, and we have a role in that desperation and in that dream.
And in helping it to come to
fruition.
To fruition.
Yeah.
I came that they may have life and have it abundantly.
Yeah, and every little thing that we do that furthers that mission, furthers that dream, you know, just gladdens the heart of the one who loves us. And wow, good stuff.
And it enables our structures, the society in which we live, the structures around us, the institutions that we're a part of, to function justly, to function for the good of all, not just the good of a few who know how to game the system. We all have a part to play.
So, we go back to good old Teresa of Avila. Christ has no body but yours. No hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world.
Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes, you are his body. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on this world. Christ has no body now on earth but yours.
Well, thank you for being part of this series. It was a bit of a challenge for us.
Oh, so far beyond our comfort zone. Yeah,
but it's good to be stretched.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
My age.
I'm sure it's been wonderful for us.
And we hope it's given you some food for thought and for action.
So as we prepare to celebrate the birth of Jesus, may God fill your hearts with joy and with hope, inspiring you to follow his example of radical, transformative love. And the blessing of God, born among us, remain with you now and always. Amen.
Amen.